What if I told you that an animal Americans nearly wiped off the map by 1960 is now thriving in the millions, all because one state did something so aggressive that almost nothing like it had been attempted before? In 1970, wildlife officers in Mississippi loaded the first of nearly 4,000 alligators into trucks at a refuge in Louisiana. The American alligator had been wiped out across most of its former range. By 1960, in large parts of the South, you simply did not see one anymore. What Mississippi did next, and what those 4,000 alligators built over the following decades, became one of the greatest wildlife comeback stories in American history. And almost nobody outside the state knows it happened. By the early 1900s, the leather industry had discovered the alligator. Demand for exotic hides exploded in Europe and the United States, and hunters poured into the swamps of the South to meet it. The hunting was completely unregulated. There were no limits, no seasons, no protections of any kind. Alligators were taken by the hundreds of thousands, year after year, decade after decade. By 1960, the damage was done. Alligators had been completely eliminated from much of their former range. Seeing one in the wild in Mississippi had become a rarity. In some areas, they had vanished entirely. The animal that had survived for over 150 million years, that had outlived the dinosaurs, was being wiped out in less than a century by hunters with rifles and boats. In 1967, the federal government finally acted. The American alligator was listed as an endangered species. All hunting was banned, all commercial trade was stopped. But banning hunting does not bring an animal back on its own. If a population is too small and too scattered, it can keep declining even with full legal protection. Mississippi needed something more aggressive. So between 1970 and 1978, the Mississippi Game and Fish Commission did something most states never even attempted. They went to a wildlife refuge in Louisiana where alligator populations were still relatively strong, and they began trapping them. Not a handful, not a few hundred. Nearly 4,000 alligators were captured, loaded onto trucks, and driven across state lines into Mississippi, where they were released into rivers, swamps, and lakes that had been empty of alligators for years. Quick question, how do you even catch 4,000 alligators without modern tranquilizer equipment? Drop your answer below, because the actual techniques wildlife officers used in the 1970s were a lot more physical than you would expect. The relocation worked faster than almost anyone predicted. By 1977, just a few years after the program began, conservation officers were finding alligators in 55 of Mississippi's 82 counties. Areas that had not seen an alligator in living memory suddenly had breeding populations again. The animals adapted to their new homes immediately, and because females can lay dozens of eggs per year, the population did not just recover, it multiplied. By 1987, the American alligator was formally removed from the endangered species list entirely. The Fish and Wildlife Service called it one of the first true success stories in the history of the Endangered Species Act, 20 years from near elimination to full recovery. For a large reptile with a slow reproductive cycle, that speed of recovery is almost unheard of. But here's where the story gets more interesting, because Mississippi was not alone. Arkansas ran a nearly identical program. Between 1972 and 1984, wildlife officials there released over 2,800 Louisiana alligators into the eastern and southern parts of the state. Louisiana itself, where the alligator population had crashed to roughly 100,000 animals by the 1950s, banned hunting outright in 1962. Years before the federal government even acted, Florida, Texas, Georgia, state after state across the American South ran the same playbook. Protect first, relocate where needed, let the population rebuild, and rebuild it did. Today, there are an estimated 5 million American alligators living across the southeastern United States. In Florida alone, the population sits at around 1.25 million. In Louisiana, the number is close to 3.5 million, nearly as many alligators as there are people in the entire state. Here is the part that surprises most people. The recovery did not just save a species, it created an entire regulated industry. American alligator leather is now used in high-end boots, belts, and luxury handbags, and the industry is valued at somewhere between $250 million and $300 million annually. In Louisiana alone, skins from roughly 400,000 farmed alligators were valued at over $56 million in 2024 alone. Here is how the system actually works today. Every single legally harvested alligator skin in the United States must carry a tamper-resistant tag under an international agreement called CITES. The tag records the species, the year, and the state where the animal was taken. Without that tag, the skin cannot legally leave the country, and most tanning companies will not even touch an untagged skin. This single piece of plastic is what turned a near-extinct reptile into one of the most tightly regulated and sustainable wildlife industries in America. And the alligator does more than generate revenue. Biologists call it a keystone species, which means its presence shapes the entire ecosystem around it. Alligators dig what are known as gator holes, depressions in wetland mud that fill with water and become refuges for fish, turtles, birds, and other animals, especially during dry seasons when the surrounding marsh dries out. Remove the alligator and you do not just lose one species, you lose the infrastructure that an entire wetland ecosystem depends on. Mississippi today allows a strictly controlled hunting season, 10 days starting on the last Friday in August. Hunters are limited to 2 alligators each, with only one allowed to exceed 7 feet in length. Every harvest is tracked. Every population is surveyed. The same state that once had to import alligators by the truckload now manages a population so healthy that controlled hunting is not just permitted, it is necessary to keep numbers balanced. Think about that for a moment. A species hunted to near elimination by 1960, rebuilt through one of the most aggressive relocation efforts in American wildlife history, removed from the endangered list within 20 years, and now supporting a multi-million-dollar industry while still functioning as one of the most important species in its entire ecosystem. The next time you see an alligator sunning itself on a riverbank in the American South, you are not just looking at a surviving relative of the dinosaurs. You are looking at the result of one of the most successful and most overlooked wildlife recovery programs in American history. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next video on this channel is going to leave you speechless. What happens next in this series is something almost nobody has heard of, and you do not want to miss it.